Hello, 4S. It's my turn to read the class novelty this week, so I'm going to carry on with The Fastest Boy in the World. And Mrs. Gibbons has already started with you, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. So if you remember at the end of the last chapter, Hamid had his money stolen from the bag around his neck, so he's a bit upset at the moment. So hopefully he's not going to be upset by the end of the next chapter. Chapter 9. I was so shocked that I couldn't move a muscle. I just stood there frozen with panic. I couldn't even open my mouth to shout, and to make things 100 times worse, I'd lost sight of Grandfather. He'd been swallowed up by the crowd. I can't have been stuck like that, paralysed for more than a moment or two, because almost at once I felt a great rush of rage, pure rage, and I began to fight my way through the mass of people, hitting out and yelling. The worst thing was not being tall enough to see over people's heads. I could tell, though, that there was a bit of a fuss going on further on, because people were calling out angrily, "Hey, mind out, don't push, stop that." I wormed my way through to where the shouts were coming from, hoping like anything that they'd stop the thief. And then I got another shock, because someone to one side of me was calling out my name. "Solomon! Over here, Solomon!" I jumped up, trying to get a glimpse over the shoulder of the woman beside me, and there, just beyond her, was Kebede. He was grinning like crazy and holding my pouch up in his hand. I felt as if I'd been punched, as if the breath had been knocked out of me. I'd trusted Kebede. I'd liked him, but he was just a thief after all, a thief who'd stolen my money. And now he was teasing me with it, laughing at me because I was a hick from the country. With one last desperate push, I got past the woman and reached him. I grabbed my pouch out of his hand and shoved my face right into his. "You dirty thief," I shouted at him. "You!" "Hey, hey," he put his hands up, and if there'd been more room, he'd have backed away from me. "I didn't steal your thing. I was waiting for you to come out of that office building. I thought it would be fun if we watched the procession together. I saw the kid who was tracking you, and the accomplice guy who gave you a push. I knew what they were up to, but before I could warn you, one of them got out a knife and cut your purse string. The big guy went off with quickly, but the smaller one who had your pouch got stuck in the crowd, so I gave him a good old punch in the guts and he doubled over, and I grabbed your purse back. Here, give it back to me and I'll tie a knot in the string, and you can put it on again. But keep it inside your shirt this time." I was so relieved. I just handed the pouch back to him, and like he said he would, he tied a knot in the string and slipped it back over my head. I was blushing with embarrassment. How could I have called Kebede a thief? He'd never want to be my friend now. "I'm really sorry I said all that," I blurted out last. "I know what you thought. But don't bother about it now. Come on, we've got to hurry. They'll be here in a minute, and I know a really good place where we can watch the procession." Then I remember Grandfather and my stomach dropped again. "I can't. I've got to find my grandfather. He'll be going crazy." "It's too late for that," Kebede said cheerfully. "He'll be way ahead by now. And how are you going to find anyone in this crowd? You'll catch up with him again when the procession's gone by. Come on, they're nearly here." He grabbed my arm and pulled me after him, and then I found myself right at the back of the crowd again, squashed up against a tall building. "We won't be able to see anything from here," I started to say, but then I saw the pipe running down the outside of the building, and I got the point at once. Kebede was shimmying up it already. He reached a windowsill and managed somehow to twist himself round so he could sit on it with his legs dangling down. "Hurry up, Solomon," he yelled down at me. "They're coming." I'm not that brilliant at climbing, to be honest. There aren't too many trees where we live, and the ones that there are get cut for firewood or fence posts as soon as they're a bit tall. I was up that pipe as if I'd been climbing all my life. Kebede gave me his hand to help me up the last bit, and he edged further along the window-sill so that I could sit beside him. I forgot about Grandfather. I forgot about everything, because my heart was pounding with excitement, and a sort of bursting pride at being Ethiopian, and a longing for I didn't know quite what. This was the moment the whole country had been waiting for. The Olympic Games had been a triumph for our runners again. Now the champions were returning, and I, Solomon, was there to greet them. It was the best moment of my whole life. I could see right over the heads of the crowd. The road was empty of traffic, and all the people were crammed onto the pavements at the sides, with policemen holding them back to keep the roadway clear. Then I heard a roaring noise, a sort of bellowing like a herd of animals. Only it was people, thousands of people cheering. It was all drowned out in a moment later, because there was another much louder noise, a terrible ear-splitting racket that scared me so much I grabbed hold of Kebede's arm before I knew what I was doing. "It's okay," he yelled, right in my ear to make himself heard. "It's only a helicopter, see?" I looked up, and there it was, hovering overhead like a giant bird. As I watched, someone leaned out of the helicopter's open side and threw handfuls of papers down from above. They fluttered over the crowd like big white feathers, and the people below jumped up to catch them. I'd never seen anything so strange in my life. I was so fascinated I forgot about everything going on down in the street. Then the helicopter seemed to roll over onto its side, and a moment later it had turned and flown off. I couldn't see it any more. Down in the street, the whole forest of Ethiopian flags had appeared. Our national colours were everywhere, red, green and gold, draped over people's shoulders and waving in the air. I was shivering with joy. "Isn't this great?" shouted Kebede, nudging me so hard I nearly fell off the window-sill. Then, from far down the road, we saw them coming. Bands of men. They were running. They carried poles over their shoulders with flags fluttering from them. They were shouting even louder than the cheering crowds. They came closer and closer until I could hear them. "Ah-oh," they were chanting. "Ah-oh, ah-oh, ah-oh." Sweat glistened on their cheeks. The crowd was on fire, yelling and clapping, and the women were crying out, "Ah-la-la-la," at the top of their voices. And then there was a blare of motor horns and police sirens and the rumble of engines, and several jeeps full of policemen with outriders on motorbikes came past, the sunlight glinting on their white helmets. Suddenly they were there. They were being carried along on the waves of sound. I could see them, our heroes, our heroines, our Ethiopian champions. There were 3 black cars. The athletes were standing on the back seats, their heads and chests sticking out of the sunroofs. They wore our flags, the gold and green and red of Ethiopia, draped over their brilliant green and yellow Team Ethiopia tracksuits. Garlands of golden flowers hung around their necks. Everyone was jumping up and down, waving their arms and cheering at the tops of their voices. And then a strange thing happened. The sound seemed to fade away. My eyes had fixed on the blue ribbon around the neck of the woman in the first car. The gold medal on the end of it glittered in the sun. I heard Kebede's voice as if it was far away. "It's her! It's Turatu Tulu, the fastest woman in the world!" Everything seemed to slow down. Turatu Tulu turned her head, and now she was looking at me. Her eyes were on me. The moment seemed to last forever. Then she turned away. But she had looked at me. She had smiled at me. My skin was prickling all over. My hair was standing on end. A moment later they had gone, and the crowd was spilling out onto the street, walking off in every direction. "Wasn't that great, Solomon? Didn't I get us a good place?" Kebede said. I hardly heard him, because someone was tugging at my foot. I looked down into the angry face of a policeman. "What are you kids doing up there? Get down here at once." "Sorry, sir," said Kebede meekly. "We're not doing any harm. We only wanted to watch." He turned round in one easy move, put his hands down on the sill, launched his body off, dangling in the air for a moment, and dropped to the ground. I still couldn't move. A vision had exploded in my head. "I had to see them," I explained seriously to the policeman. "I had to know what it's like, because one day that's going to be me. One day I'm going to win gold at the Olympic Games." Chapter 10. Kebede had told me that you should never talk back to a policeman in Addis Ababa. They get mad at you for nothing. But it was such a special day that this policeman didn't seem to get angry. He even nearly smiled. When I scrambled down off the windowsill, he just smacked us both over the head, but lightly, and told us to hop it. Now that the glory of seeing the athletes had gone, I was really worried about grandfather. I didn't know where to start looking for him. Kebede didn't understand at all. He was busy giving a thumbs-up sign to a friend, a boy inside a passing minibus whose face was pressed up against the window. "What are you so worried about?" he said, turning his attention back to me. "Your grandfather will be all right. He knows his way around. Look, you've never been to Addis before, have you? Now's your chance. I can show you the sights. You can tell your granddad you got lost and couldn't find your way back." I stared at him. Not even Marcus was as daring as Kebede. I'd never met anyone so bold and free before. For one mad moment I was tempted to go with him, but I knew I couldn't. "Grandfather, he's not well," I said, afraid that I sounded lame. "I was supposed to be looking after him." Kebede shrugged, and I was afraid that he was going to run off and leave me. But then he just grinned and said, "I'll take you back to our place. I bet you'll find your granddad there." We got to Piazza in no time. Kebede was so fast, darting across roads between the cars and trucks and dodging around people on the pavements, I could hardly keep up with him. Once I thought I was going to get squashed flat under a van that appeared from nowhere just when I stepped into a road. Then suddenly we were almost back at Kebede's uncle's shop, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw there was a cluster of people around the door. I knew, I don't know how, that something bad had happened. And I was right, because when we got there, Kebede's uncle came out through the door. When he saw me, he grabbed hold of me and pushed me inside. He looked upset. "Where have you been, boy? He's been needing you." Then he saw Kebede and frowned angrily. "You running off again, you useless!" I wasn't listening to him any more, because by now my eyes had got used to the darkness inside the shop. The sunshine outside had been dazzling, and I could see Grandfather. He was lying across 3 chairs that had been pushed together, and he was quite still. For an awful moment I thought that he was dead. A couple of women were beside him. One was fanning his face, the other was rubbing her hands, and she turned to look at me. She must have seen what I was thinking, because she said, "He's been unconscious, but he's coming round now. God is good." The other one said, "Where's he staying? He's your grandfather, isn't he? You'll have to get him home." I didn't wait a moment longer, but turned and dashed out of the shop. Cousin Wandoo might be a cheat, trying to steal Grandfather's medal, and I knew I shouldn't trust him, but he was a cousin after all, Grandfather's own nephew, the only person I could think of who could help. I must have had wings on my feet, because I was round the corner and outside Cousin Wandoo's house before I'd hardly started. The metal door in the high wall along the street was shut and locked. I thumped on it as hard as I could and yelled, "Cousin Wandoo! Cousin Meseret! Please come out!" As I heard someone fiddling with the lock, and it opened, but only a crack. Cousin Wandoo was looking out doubtfully. "What is it, Solomon? What are you making all that racket for?" "Please, oh please!" I could feel a sob rising up inside my chest. "Grandfather's been taken ill. He's really bad. He's just round the corner in a shop. I don't know what to do." Cousin Wandoo looked almost relieved. He'd probably expected that Grandfather would come storming back in a furious temper, having found out about his cheating. He opened the door wide. "I told him, didn't I, to rest today? I told him not to go traipsing about town. He didn't go far then, only to Piazza." I could tell what he was up to. He wanted to find out if I'd been into Atu Elemu's office. I wasn't going to let on. I didn't want to distract him from helping Grandfather. "Please, Cousin Wandoo, just come." "Wait here," he said, and shut the door in my face. I stood outside in the street, hopping from one leg to another, and feeling so impatient that I nearly started banging on the door again. But it was only a few minutes until he came out. "Just fetching this," he said, holding out his mobile phone to show me. "We might need to call a doctor." When we got back to the shop, I could have cried with relief. Grandfather was sitting up. He still looked awful, his head resting against the wall behind him, his mouth open and his eyes shut. But at least he was alive. "Uncle!" Cousin Wandoo put his hand on Grandfather's shoulder. "It's me, Wandoo. Can you hear me? Are you all right, Uncle?" "Of course he's not all right," I wanted to shout at him. "Can't you see he's really ill?" "I think he's had a heart attack," Kebedi's uncle said. "He looks really bad. You ought to take him to the hospital. He can't stay here. He needs to be in bed." I could tell he was getting a bit impatient with us. I supposed it was bad for business, having sick people in the shop. He was a kind man, though. He still looked as if he was concerned. Cousin Wandoo didn't answer. He just started punching numbers into his phone. Then he went outside the shop with it pressed to his ear. Grandfather's head flopped to one side. I thought he was going to topple off his chair, so I sat down beside him to prop him up. "Grandfather," I said softly, "it's me, Solomon." I wanted to say, "Don't worry, you'll be all right." I didn't, because I knew he would have said, "Don't be silly, boy. Only God knows what will happen. You certainly don't." So I just sat there and waited. Kebedi's uncle had gone back behind the counter and was weighing out sugar for the woman who'd been patting Grandfather's hand. The other one had gone, and the little crowd that had been hanging around waiting for something dramatic to happen had gone away too. The new customers coming into the shop hardly glanced at us sitting in our dark corner. I felt Grandfather's arm move and looked up at him. His eyes were open. He turned towards me and was trying to say something. I couldn't make out the words. He coughed weakly, his eyes screwed up as if he was in pain. Then he tried to talk again. "Did you tell Wandoo about Atu Elemu in the meadow?" "No, Grandfather." He gave a tiny nod, and I could see he was pleased. Then he looked down towards his chest. "Take it." It took a moment for me to understand. "Take what? The medal?" He made a little grunting noise, and I could tell he was impatient with me for not understanding at once. It felt funny, really bold and cheeky, feeling under Grandfather's shawl and sticking my fingers into his pocket. Actually, it was quite easy to hook out the little box. I slid it into the pocket of my shorts. Grandfather let his head roll back, and I could tell he was relieved. He hadn't finished talking, though. "Go home, now. Fetch your father." I stared at him. "Grandfather, I can't. I don't know the way." "Bus," he quoted, "to Kidami. Go now. Get there tonight." I felt sick with fright. Where would I find a bus? How much would it cost? Would they even let me on by myself? Cousin Wandoo came back into the shop. His voice sounded stronger than it had before, as if he'd made a decision. "I'm taking you to hospital, Uncle," he said. "There's a taxi waiting outside. We'll get you into a bed there, and the doctors will see you. You'll be better in no time. Here, Solomon, help me get him up." It was hard heaving Grandfather to his feet. We almost had to carry him outside. He collapsed onto the back seat of the taxi and looked worse than ever, as if he was struggling to take every breath. Cousin Wandy was bending down to give directions to the taxi driver when Cousin Meseret came running up. "What's going on?" she said sharply to Cousin Wandy. "What's all the fuss about?" I stepped back. She hadn't seen me. "It's Uncle Demisi," said Cousin Wandy. "He's been taken bad. You got my message then?" "Yes, and I've got to get back to work. They don't like people running off in the middle of the day, I can tell you." She bent down and peered into the taxi at Grandfather. "He looks bad. Did he go to see? Does he know?" "I don't think so," Cousin Wandu said, "and I hope he never finds out. I've had enough of your silly tricks, Meseret. I should never have let you put me up to it." "Me?" she glared at him. "You're blaming me? It was your idea. You said—" "I did not. You were the one—" "Oh, please," I said, darting between them, "just get into the hospital." "Hospital?" exploded Cousin Meseret. "Who's going to pay for a hospital?" "I am," said Cousin Wandu. "He's my uncle, and I'm going to do the right thing for once. Here, Solomon, hop in on the other side." I can't, Uncle," I said, stepping back. "He told me to go home. He wants me to go to Gadami on the bus now, this afternoon, and fetch my father." Cousin Wandu looked at his watch. "That's not a bad idea. You have to be quick. There's only one bus to Gadami in the afternoon. It might have gone already." "I don't know where to go. Where do I go to get it?" I said, feeling panicky again. Someone tugged at my sleeve. I turned and saw Kebedi. "I can take you to the bus station," he said. "I'll ask my uncle," and he darted back into the shop. Cousin Wandu looked relieved. He was about to say something when Grandfather began to cough, and the cough turned into a groan. "Don't worry, Grandfather. I'll be all right," I said. "Kebedi will help me. Please, Cousin Wandu, just take him to the hospital." Grandfather groaned again. Cousin Wandu hesitated for a moment longer, then got into the taxi and it sped off down the street. Kebedi came out of the shop with his uncle close behind him. "I suppose you'll have to show the boy the way," the old man was grumbling, but Kebedi's eyes were dancing. "I know, straight to the bus station, straight back again," he said with a grin. He peeped inside again to check his uncle was busy with a customer, then lifted a few bananas off the fruit stand outside the shop. "I'm starving," he said. "Bet you are too. Come on, Solomon. If you want to catch that bus, we'll have to run." And that's where we're going to finish for today. So hopefully Grandfather, when he gets to hospital, will be feeling a little bit better. We'll find out tomorrow.